My guest for this session of the Cyber Leaders Exchange is Sean Frazier, the Federal Chief Security Officer at Okta. Sean, always a pleasure to have you on. Great to talk to you again.
Yeah, Jason, good to see you. Great to be with you.
As we continue our discussion today about zero trust and we delve into it, I'm going to take maybe a big old step backward and talk a little bit about something that happened maybe a month or so ago. The White House held an event around what they called the MFA Symposium, multi-factor authentication. I think you attended that, which is always fun to go to the White House. It's always always one of my favorite places to go. So maybe talk a little bit about why they held it. What does it mean that the White House is raising all this attention around multi-factor authentication? And then we'll get into what was talked about there.
Yeah, I thought it was really great. As a matter of fact, as I was leaving, I was talking to folks about how we should do this more often. We should get folks together more often and talk about these things. And it really was a very useful check-in to see where everybody was. And we all know that there's a lot of guidance around identity and access management. I think, CISA and everyone's telling everyone to use multi-factor authentication, but not all MFA is created equal. And I think that was one of the common threads of the symposium, was to talk about phishing resistant factors. How do we think about multi-factor authentication in a better user experience way? And how do we make this as really the jumping off point to start talking about getting rid of the password? So making passwordless authentication a real thing. And I think it was really useful. Lots of good government people, lots of good policy people, lots of good contractors, lots of good engagement from industry. So it was really useful.
Sean, we hear a lot about this idea of phishing resistant authentication. Maybe we should define what that actually means, because if, for instance, you have a username and password, but you need a second factor, let's say a code that gets text to me, I would say that's phishing resistance. My phone, you have to steal my phone and know my password and know my username, but that's not what we're talking about here.
No, because what we've seen the attackers get way more sophisticated way faster. And what ends up happening is, if it's only something that you know, then that's also something that can be either gleaned, guessed, or taken from you. So, for example, with SMS, a good example. And I always tell people that any MFA is better than no MFA. So if you're telling me you can't do any MFA and the only thing you can do is SMS, I'd say, okay, do that. But anytime you have something that you know, like a password, and also something that's going to be shared with you, like an OTP, it's really not that difficult for attackers to either figure that out, or figure out a way for you to give it to them, or figure out a way to sit in the middle of that conversation and pull that off the network and use it on your behalf. So what phishing resistance means is, it means there's no ability to be the man in the middle, to be the person in the middle where you can actually capture information that's being gleaned from that authentication stream. So it includes some things like the user origin binding. It includes things like the device binding. So it moves all those things into the conversation, so that even if the person got anything off of the wire as part of that conversation, they could not use that to impersonate you.
I think that's helpful, because I think what people think about is, well, who's going to have my cell phone, or who's going to get that email that I get, or even, something like, you go certain places, you confirm it's you on your cell phone. Yes, it's me, right? I think a couple of the email services do that now. And when you're saying it includes user origin or device binding, that means that device is binded to you, the user, right? And maybe talk a little bit about what that means, because again, I think we talk a lot about these things, but we don't maybe do enough to define them.
Yeah, so there's an enrollment process the users will go through to kind of bind that device to that authentication and to that user, so that device is only being able to be used by that user. And it's incumbent upon that enrollment process to capture that. I think a really good example of this is that Cybersecurity Safety Review Board released their findings on Lapsus a couple of weeks ago. And they actually talked about this very succinctly, and talked about how you could use SIM swapping, and there are other techniques that attackers can use. And it's a combination of social engineering, it's a combination of technical engineering, and it's a combination of blind luck. And oh, by the way, a lot of these tools are available for just folks to download. So it's not like they have to be all that sophisticated these days. And there's a really good section where they talk about how you don't have to be all that sophisticated to be the man in the middle, to be able to take these things. So if you don't have that device binding, you don't have that origin binding, meaning that I kicked off the process, I will finish the process, then you really are subject to phishing.
Sean, I know you and I have talked about this before, and I always like to bring this up. How many years ago was it that the White House said we're going to kill the password dead? Was it Michael Daniel who said this, or was it somebody else who said it? Are we any closer to killing the password dead finally?
Yeah, we're finally getting there. We've been talking about this, I would say, almost 20 years. that we've been talking about getting rid of the password. So it's been a while, but part of it is the technology had to catch up to where we are. And those of us who have been using the common access cards and the PIN cards knows exactly what I'm talking about. We've created a lot of technology, a lot of infrastructure to be able to try to do this, but we haven't seen it happen at scale in a way that supports kind of the consumer use cases and supports the way that human beings work today with mobile phones and mobile devices. So we're getting to the point now with FIDO and specifically passkeys where the technology is there and it's ripe for deployment. So if you think about your citizen facing or consumer facing, you would use passkeys. If you're thinking about your enterprise users, you would use FIDO2 or WebAuthn. The technologies on the bigger platforms that everybody uses have finally caught up. So I'm out there banging the drum pretty much every single day saying now is the time to really start implementing these technologies.
I'm a big fan of getting rid of the password, Sean. I will admit it. I have a document. Shh, don't tell the bad guys where all my passwords are. But we also use something else. So we have the second factor in many ways. So I feel like I'm more secure. Famous last words, right? Now you're probably all worried about me now. I'm gonna get a call from Sean later on.
These are steps along a journey, my friend. These are steps along a journey, right? Whether it's a spreadsheet, hopefully not a spreadsheet, but a password manager or something in multi-factor authentication. These are steps we're taking now. The next step is to get rid of those passwords.
I look forward to it for sure. When you talk about this idea of phishing resistant and talk about this idea of getting rid of passwords, well, this is the perfect segue to zero trust. I mean, we cannot have a cyber conversation without zero trust. This is obviously part of our session for today at the Cyber Leaders Exchange. What are you starting to see with zero trust? Where are we today? What kind of progress are agencies making?
Yeah, you can't have zero trust without strong identity and access management. And you really can't have strong identity and access management without preventing phishing and doing all the things we're talking about. So these are peas and carrots technologies and capabilities that work very well together. So I think we're seeing some maturity along the pillar one. I mean, identity is pillar one for a reason in zero trust. We're seeing some maturity around pillar one, these conversations around phishing resistant factors, tying into the device signals. So I talk about some of these things like device binding and device signaling for risk, tying those kinds of things that sit at pillar two, also very zero trusty. I think one of the things that we're kind of hit a little bit of a wall here is just the concept of zero trust not being a technology problem. It's a people problem and a cultural problem. Because as you think about this as kind of the modernization of security, sometimes making big changes, and to me, it's almost evolution, not revolution. So these changes are not nearly as big as they seem up front, but they're still resistant to change because we're human beings. It's kind of what we do. So the cultural shift of moving from I've got firewalls and I've got IPS and IDS and I'm protecting everything on this network and moving that security to the endpoints. And when I say endpoints, I mean the user, I mean the device the user is using, and then I mean the application that they're communicating to. That's a big fundamental shift for folks. And I think it's taking folks a little bit of figuring out how do they deliver that within their agencies? How do they pick up a communications plan to do that? How do they pick up an interaction plan where they can help people along the way? I talk about this as almost a center of excellence approach. It's the same thing we did with mobility back 15 years ago. You need to kind of wrap your arms around it, have a center of excellence approach where every part of your organization is thinking about this and you're talking about it holistically.
Sean, I want to touch upon the people and the culture piece, but let me just maybe take a half a step back and talk about the technology. We know it's not a technology problem, or the challenge of technology has been solved in a bigger way than maybe the people side. A lot of agencies have been implementing, identity access management. A lot of agencies have maybe some older technology they're trying to update. What are you seeing when you talk to your clients? Are they moving off of the old technology and into new technology? Are they just trying to expand it? What is the technology challenge that a lot of your clients are trying to overcome?
Yeah, and part of that is figuring out what your journey looks like. And if you're looking at it from the perspective of investment, no one's going to be able to just rip what they have out and replace it with something else. So you're going to have to invest in something where you're building along that journey. And it's one of the reasons why technology companies like ours and others are looking at to support where people are today, support where their applications are, support where their users are, making sure you can support that legacy, but give them an aperture to open up for open standards and the modern cloud era that we're into. So having kind of that ability to bridge the gap between where they are and still support that, because there's still good money that they're invested there and you want to be able to leverage that, but figure out what your path is to move to more modern technologies, and always be thinking about this from the perspective of what do my users do to access data, and where do they access from? In a lot of cases, things have changed over the last 5 or 6 years, where it's no longer I'm in the office, I sit at a desk, that's my computer, I'm connecting to something that's in the server room down the hall. I'm now in the Starbucks, I'm now on an iPhone, I'm now on an airplane, and I want to be able to access that same application. Oh, by the way, that application got modernized, it's now in the cloud, it's no longer in a server room down the hall in my facility. So how do I make sure that my security infrastructure and architecture is flexible enough to support all of those use cases, the ones I have today, as they move up into the cloud and modernize?
I think the use case piece you bring up is really interesting because so much has changed over the last few years around those use cases. I mean, that's why we know, for instance, CISA put out their TIC 3 update because the use cases are different, and there's many use cases within the Trusted Internet Connections 3. But even more broadly than that, how you get rid of VPNs, how you access cloud services, all of that now is, again, relying on the user and comes back down to the user. Is that the biggest challenge agencies are facing from a technology, is understanding their use cases and applying the technology? Or is it still, there's still just so much legacy debt that, okay, how do you take something like Okta and apply it to a 25, 35, 40-year-old system?
Yeah, it's all of the above. And I think that in a lot of cases, we're starting to see some money flow around zero trust from budgeting perspectives. But initially, if you remember when 2209 came out, it said a lot of good things, but it didn't tell people how to pay for it. So it's always going to be one of the challenges that, I've got to do all this stuff. This is now mandated to me, and I got to figure out, how do I do that and move from where I am to where I need to go? And you're exactly right. And I'm a huge fan of Sean Connolly and the TIC work done at CISA, and in order to modernize those conversations and allowing folks to have options, so I can move from where I am today, move to where I'm going. And I'm not one of those guys who say, kill the VPN, get rid of the VPN. The VPN has its usefulness for some things, but what I don't like is, I don't like opening up a window into your entire architecture through one small peephole, which is that VPN. Because what you do is you basically say the VPN is the thing that's protecting everything. All the attacker has to do is get onto that VPN and they have access to the crown jewels. So again, from a risk perspective, VPN has a place in the network if the application needs to be, you need to get through the VPN to get to that application. But in the case of where modernization is happening, you're moving everything to the cloud, it makes no sense to have things go through your local network or your VPN and then a hairpin back out to the cloud. And that's exactly what TIC 3.0 outlined.
And you bring up the point of, that's why the moving the security to the data, to the user, to the device, the end user device, is so much more important today than ever before because of that VPN issue. If I always go through the VPN, then right, you have access to my world. Now, again, they can add a second factor to that, but that still, as you said, can be gleaned, guessed, or stolen in some way. I think that's the concern. The other side, you brought this up earlier, so let's talk about the people and the cultural side. Interestingly enough, we've been talking about this for 25, 30 years, as long as we've been doing this, Sean, that it's never a technology problem. It's always the people problem, the culture problem. Why is this still such a big challenge? We know cyber attacks are coming. We know we've got to be better about it. It's not even a feeling of, well, that's going to happen to Sean, but not me. So Sean has to do it, but not me. It's already happened to me. I've already been impacted by the OPM breach. I've already been impacted by the private sector breaches. So why are we still talking about this as a culture problem?
Yeah, and that's one of the biggest challenges is not looking at it as, embracing the change and figuring out how the change can be leveraged to your advantage, rather than kind of feeling like the change is hurting you in some way. And that's just, human beings are reluctant to change, although change is happening all around us all the time. And there are things that outside of our control. Think about, again, the last few years of the rate of change to modernization and moving applications to the cloud. That would happen to you regardless of what you feel about security, regardless of whether you thought that you could wrap a bubble around your data using networks and VPNs and sensors and all those different things. You were working under the assumption that the network was never going to change, the attack surfaces were never going to change, the attackers were never going to change, and the way we access things were never going to change. So if you aligned yourself to that thinking, then you're not aligned yourself to reality, because all of those things have changed underneath of us. And if you don't adapt to that and change your kind of fundamental philosophy about the way security should be done, then you're at a disadvantage. And we're starting to see people pick up on this. We're starting to see a real change with this. I mentioned the center of excellence approach, being able to kind of handhold your users, having that strong communication platform. And this is not a government problem or an agency problem. This is a writ large technology problem in society, where you need to have that ability where you meet the users where they are. You provide very little friction for them. You provide all the friction to the attackers, and you build a robust security architecture that is flexible enough to support that. And oh, by the way, support the next thing that's going to happen in the next 5 or 10 years, which is going to be, we're all going to be wearing Vision Pro headsets and everything's going to be spatial computing, and we're not even going to have phones anymore. And that's coming.
So you're saying Google Glasses was a little early. That's what you're saying to me right now.
A little early. I think
early.
Vision Pro might be a tad early too, but we're coming to there. Next 5, 10 years, spatial computing is going to be a thing. Mark my words.
All right, you heard it here first, folks. Sean Frazier looked in his crystal ball and says we're all going to be wearing glasses and bumping into each other, worse than we already do with our phones. Whatever it was, Twitter or X, whatever they call it, will be videos of us bumping into each other instead of falling off the curb while we look at our phones. Sean, I had a really interesting conversation with the EPA CIO recently, Von Noga, and he talked about creating teams to communicate. So during the pandemic and post-pandemic, as they're doing modernization, he has the IT people talk to this team. This team creates a communication plan and talks to the non-IT people in the agency. And then the way the IT people don't have to worry about, am I explaining it the right way? Do they understand what I mean? And these people don't have to worry about, do I understand what the IT people said? Because they just confused me. Is that something you're seeing more and more to address this culture change, these other communication challenges?
Yeah, and I'm a huge fan of that. I think that is the way you get through this, is you bridge the gap and understanding of knowledge between the different teams. And we're guilty of that too. Most Silicon Valley based companies are guilty of that because we're technology companies. We assume everybody that works for us are technology people, and they just intrinsically understand this stuff, and they intrinsically do all the right security things. And that couldn't be further from the truth. And the bigger you get as an organization, the more you're dealing with folks who security is not their job, although security should be everyone's job, but we have to help educate them. We have to bring them to that. We have to bring communications down, to the level where they can make the best understanding, make the best decisions for the organization, and tell them why they're doing it. Why is this important for users to be part of the security conversation? Because it absolutely is. They are the tip of the spear. They are the folks who are interacting with customers. They're the folks interacting with citizens. They're the people who are usually the first targets. Whether it be their LinkedIn accounts or whether it be their social media accounts, they tend to be the first target for attackers, where the attackers can either get something from them or move horizontally or laterally to other people within the organization. So, I always say security is a team sport, and it starts with those user conversations. It starts with us talking to users in ways that people can understand.
And part of the move towards zero trust, as we were talking about earlier, is because that recognition that users are the tip of the spear. If we don't protect the user, the employee who's talking to the citizen, or the citizen who's trying to get onto the government website, or the business, then we're really not protecting the network, because we're leaving ourselves open to a simple click on that link and all of a sudden, boom, you've got a lot of access. Do you find that as you are talking about why better authentication is necessary, why we've got to move to phishing resistant authentication, the user, the average person, the average employee gets it now more than ever? Or is there still that hesitant, well, why do I have to take that, other number and put it in? Or why do I need to go to the post office and prove who I am?
So this is the balance, because I think there is a wider understanding of security. We certainly see it in the news all the time now. Folks like my mother understand what cyber risk is now, which she didn't 10 years ago. But this is an opportunity for us to meet users where they are. This is an opportunity for us to bring them capabilities where they're not spending 10 minutes trying to log in at something. They're not having to figure out how many clicks they have to do. They're not having to go out and figure out, where did I put that device where I get my 6-digit code on? I got to go find that thing. So this is an opportunity, again, for these technologies, the passkeys, the FIDO2 technologies, to enable it to make it much easier for users to do the strong, correct thing. So it's a balancing act. And again, awareness is certainly part of that. Again, it's all hands on deck for this. It's user awareness is part of it. But we as practitioners have to give them good user experiences for strong security.
You mentioned that a couple of times, good user experience. I think that's the next part of our discussion a little bit, Sean, is because this is not just about adding more security. This is not just about making authentication passwordless. It's about really the digital experience, the user experience, a digital transformation that's really happening across agencies. I know we will go first. Don't leave security out. So maybe talk a little bit about your thoughts there. I think we've got tired of hearing bake it in, don't bolt it on. We got to move out past that, right?
Yeah, now I am just as passionate about good user experiences as I am about good security outcomes. And I think this is one area where we have challenges where, we as security people like to be the people of no. We're going to tell you what you can't do because we're security people. And we have to figure out ways to enable people so we're the people of yes. So we can give them strong security by giving them, strong ways to do things. And we have to recognize the world we live in. Most users have a stronger, more powerful computer in their pocket today than I ever had on my desk 20 years ago. So we need to leverage that strong compute platform that they've got in their pocket and provide the strength of that platform for the user and not let it be taken advantage of by the attackers. And that's our job as security practitioners, to make it as easy as we can, as frictionless as we can for the users, while still making them aware that there's risks out there. There are things as a user you need to pay attention to, but we need to make sure that not all of the onus for security is put on the end users, which we're kind of back to the password. That's exactly what the password is. It put all the onus of security on the user.
So Sean, here's your curveball. You asked me to give you a curveball. My first computer was a 286 when I went to college. What was your first computer?
My first computer was a TRS-80 Model 3. So I'm a little older than you. That one came out in 78. So I've been doing this compute thing for a while. Couldn't lug that thing around.
Do you still have your TRS-80? Come on.
I do. Yeah, my wife's very upset about my vintage computer collection. She made me move it to the garage.
One day when we were hanging out, I'll tell you about my Commodore 64 story. I want to go back to one thing you said about, frictionless, but make sure they know there's risks. Some of that frictionlessness is coming back to you all as the providers. You saw the White House put out their national cybersecurity strategy implementation plan. They talk about put the burden back on the software developers, put the burden back on the providers to get to that secure by design, secure by default. CISA's talking a lot about it. Walk me through what that means and how's that burden shifted?
So I agree with that for the most part. I think that the burden for a lot of this as builders of software and builders of security should be put on us. We should build secure by design things. We shouldn't rely on the end user being able to configure things appropriately in order for them to be secure. They should be the most secure out of the box as they possibly can be. The flip side and devil's advocate for this and challenges is I'm okay with doing that, provided that there's not undue policy burden on top of it, because there is this concept of fatigue. We talk about security fatigue all the time, where users, they're tired of getting that push notification, so they're just going to say yes to everything because they're just fatigued about the stuff that happens all the time to them. There is the concept of provider fatigue as well. And if 10 different groups are telling me 10 different things that I have to adhere to, that's expensive for companies like Okta and others to be able to do that. So if we can do things where we're doing policy, and I think the cybersecurity strategies does a good job of this. I think there's still some room on the identity side. We're not seeing the identity guidance come out of that yet, but I'm hopeful that we will. So if they're open standards and they're pushing us to open standards, that's a great thing, because that allows us to be on a level playing field with everyone who builds the same technology that we build. If we're building to security open standards, it's even better. So that way we're building it the right way from the ground up. That way we're building it, again, kind of baked in from our perspective, and the security exists there. It's just, you can't give us 10 hoops to jump through and have them be 10 completely different hoops that we've got to spend money for, because then we got to figure out which ones we can afford. And I don't want to look at 10 hoops and figure out I can only afford these 5 hoops. These other 5 I can't do. So if we're looking at the lens of single policy, adhere to open standards, do secure by design, I think I'm very much in favor of that.
You mentioned the guidance around identity and access management potentially coming. We've had a lot of guidance over the years. There's a rumored executive order still waiting on. Who knows if that's actually going to come out. But Sean, in the last few minutes we have together, let me just ask you, where is this all going? You talk about let's get rid of the password. Let's go to phishing resistant multi-factor authentication. How close are agencies? What can they do to start closing that gap even faster?
So I think some agencies are closer than others. I think those, again, who have kind of adopted the mindset shift around center of excellence approach for cybersecurity and zero trust and having identity part of that are a little further ahead of the game. I think one of the challenges is kind of marrying up where the future of identity is going with where we are now. So again, the smart cards and kind of bridging the gap between those and kind of where we go to in the future. I think one of the other challenges on the policy perspective is we are waiting for that cybersecurity executive strategy on identity. We're waiting for that executive order on identity. We're still waiting for 863-4 to come out. So there are a few things that agencies are waiting for. We need help with, but I think a lot of us are kind of plugged in enough that we kind of know what's coming, so we can give good guidance on some of those things. And it's a lot of the same things that we've been talking about here just now, which is the phishing resistance, strong identity and access management, tying into risk signaling across the board. So from a zero trust perspective, device risk signaling, application risk signaling, there's a really good open standard that we're adhering to, that a lot of our partner companies are adhering to around that. So I think making sure that we're focused on those open standards, it used to be many years ago from a technology perspective, we were all in on open standards, and we got away from that for a while. And now I'm seeing that come back. And I'm a big believer that all the agencies should be looking at these open standards. FIDO, Kate from the OpenID group, which is the risk sharing open standard. I think open standards are the way that we all get there in the most economical way possible.
Sean, you and I will continue to talk about this because this is not going to be solved anytime soon. We've been talking about it for several decades now, but agencies are getting better. We know they're making progress. We know things are getting harder on attackers. There's less friction, as you said, on the user. All these good things are happening. We just need to go maybe a little faster.
I'd like to go faster, put one foot in front of the other, but maybe running, not walking.
There you go. We're out of the crawl stage. There you go. Sean Frazier is the Federal Chief Security Officer at Okta. Sean, always a pleasure. Thanks so much for your time.
Yeah, Jason, always good to see you.
I'm Jason Miller. Now let me send you back to the studio for more from the Cyber Leaders Exchange on Federal News Network.